All right, it's 7 o'clock here in New York City. Straight to a Fox News alert. That handshake will go down in history because overnight, North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un has agreed to completely denuclearizing the Korean peninsula following meetings with President Trump.
You got two world leaders signing this document with the world watching. President Trump says the summit is the start of a new chapter between both nations.
Today is the beginning of an arduous process. Our eyes are wide open, but peace is always worth the effort, especially in this case.
And he is now on his way back to Washington, D.C. from Singapore as the first U.S. president to come face to face with the leader of North Korea. And Rich Edson is live in Singapore with what is next after this historic meeting. Good morning, Rich.
Good morning, Ainsley, Brian, and Steve. And much more work is upcoming. President Trump and Kim Jong-un agreeing to a framework here in Singapore. And now the president says it is up to negotiators to vigorously begin to implement this agreement. The president says North Korea has agreed to dismantle its nuclear weapons program. He says Kim Jong-un says he will destroy a missile engine testing site and then return American service members' remains from the Korean War. The president says the U.S. will maintain sanctions, though will not add additional sanctions. The U.S. and South Korea will suspend joint military exercises, and eventually the president says he wants to remove U.S. military from the region, though that is not part of this agreement, according to the president. All of this is possible, he says, because Kim Jong-un is prepared to start a new history.
Yesterday's conflict does not have to be tomorrow's war. And as history has proven over and over again, adversaries can indeed become friends.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and other senior security officials will continue negotiations with North Korea. The president says it may take another summit to finally achieve this full deal. He acknowledges that it does take a long time to officially pull off denuclearization. Back to you.
All right, 7:02 p.m. in Singapore. Rich, thank you.
Yeah, when people were asking questions at the press conference that the president had this morning around 4 a.m., people were asking, did you talk about this? Did you talk about this? He said, we didn't really have time. This was our first meeting. So as Rich was just saying, there will be more summits. And I know Mike Pompeo will be meeting with the North Korean counterpart. A lot.
Some things that jumped out. Number one, they didn't put verifiable and irretrievable, but they're working towards that. They didn't talk about weapons inspectors and who would actually be on the ground, but they're working towards that. He understands that. He believes there's going to be more things done relatively quickly, and one will be this this engine facility that will immediately be taken down. The president did not commit to ratcheting down any of the sanctions. He did not say he's moving out 32,000 troops, but he did say the military war games will stop. However, Lucas Tomlinson at the Pentagon said they have not gotten that message yet, which just means it hasn't gone down the pike.
Right. It came from the commander-in-chief. I think he's the boss over there. Meanwhile, during the press availability, the president was asked, what did Kim say that you believed you could trust him? And he said that he seemed to want this as much as we do. So going forward, when you look at what they agreed to, they got the big stuff. The denuclearization of the Korean peninsula, the sanctions are going to stay in place, and something they worked out at the last minute, and that it's the bottom line right there. A number of sets of remains of POWs and MIAs from the Korean War will be returned to their family. Of course, the big thing is the denuking. Sean Hannity, before the press conference, actually sat down with the president for, I think, in excess of a half an hour, and that was a topic they spoke of here.
I just think that we are now going to start the process of denuclearization of North Korea, and I believe that he's going back and will start it virtually immediately. And he's already indicated that. And you look at what he's done. So we got our hostages back, but they've blown up one of their sites, one of their testing sites, their primary testing site. In fact, some people say their only testing site. They're getting rid of a missile, which isn't in the document that was done afterwards. They're getting rid of a missile testing site. They're doing so much now. So it's a process, and it's really moving rapidly.
Yeah, you got to figure, too, that both sides don't trust each other. So there's got to be a series of confidence measures there. And China and South Korea will play a role, and so will Japan. He was asked at one point, hey, what about those abductees? North Korea actually went into Japan and grabbed 13 people. We never even found out what happened to them. They brought that up. We're going to get some answers on that.
Yeah, and there's so many things that he didn't get a chance to talk to him about, and he says he will in the future. The highlight was obviously the de-nuking. Also, 3 American hostages were sent home safely. The U.S. and North Korea, they're working toward peace. The remains of those POW MIA, they're coming home now. All these families are saying we lost our loved ones in the war, in the Korean War. Tens of thousands of Americans were killed in that bloody battle 68 years ago. So the president says we're going to bring those remains home. And then Kim agreed to close the engine testing site. And he says, our president says he knows that it's there because we have great equipment that can determine where the heat is, and we can find out where their testing sites are. And then the president says he's optimistic that the Korean War, they will end the Korean War officially. In the middle of the night, when there was that big table and they got ready to sign the documents, that's what a lot of journalists were speculating. They thought they were signing maybe the end of the Korean War. Turns out they were signing that document for peace and for denuclearization and to bring the POW and MIAs home.
The president was asked, so did you talk to him about human rights? And he said, yeah, we did discuss it. Not extensively, not as much as denuking, but that's a conversation for later. Sean Hannity was on with us 1 hour ago, talking a little bit about tonight's interview you will see 9 p.m. Eastern time on Hannity. And he said, regarding the president making the trip to Singapore, this is really big.
What makes this president so far transformative in terms of being unlike any president we have ever seen in our lifetime. The only closest parallel I would see would be Ronald Reagan, because obviously it's peace through strength, it's trust but verify, strong rhetoric is being used. But if you really think about the magnitude and the possibilities here, again, being cautious, nothing is finished until it's done. Once the process, as the president pointed out, once that process of denuclearization begins, you can't go back scientifically. So I think this is going to happen in short order, and I think that the president deserves a lot of credit for being willing to talk to somebody that everybody thought would be a bad idea, but he did it from a position of strength.
And the whole denuclearization process, they have the most extensive nuclear program that's going to be dismantled. Ukraine, it took 4 years. With Libya, it took a couple of less years, but that was a cooperative country. They said, listen, we don't want these. South Africa says, come and take these. Libya said, I'll work out a deal. If you take these and establish relations with us, you can have them. They did. Ukraine obviously paid the price because without the nukes, the Russians walked right in, and they're still there. One of the most telling moments, I thought, one of the poignant moments, was the question from one of the reporters about Otto Warmbier. And the president put it in perspective. What Otto sacrificed his life, but it wasn't for nothing.
Otto Warmbier is a very special person, and he will be for a long time in my life. His parents are good friends of mine. I think without Otto, this would not have happened. Something happened from that day. It was a terrible thing. It was brutal. But a lot of people started to focus on what was going on, including North Korea. I really think that Otto is someone who did not die in vain. I told this to his parents. Special young man, and I have to say, special parents, special people. Otto did not die in vain. He had a lot to do with us being here today.
And that's exactly why his parents said they were coming on Fox and Friends to give us one of the few interviews that they gave the media, because they said they want you at home to understand what this man is capable of and what happens in this country. And I think that brought attention to North Korea. All of us started paying attention when you heard a mom and a dad describe the torture that their son went through. That pulled at all of our heartstrings, and we felt so badly for them. And when I talked to his dad, recently, his dad said, I'm so glad these 3 hostages came home safely. We do wonder why they chose to do what they did to my son.
And when the president said, because of his life, we were focused on North Korea, ultimately, that's when the rhetoric started getting ratcheted up. He referred to him as a little rocket man. There was the fire and the fury, and then there was the back and forth. And Kim referred to the president as a dotard, political dotard or something like that. But nonetheless, look at how far we have come in the last year. They just signed an historic agreement that puts us on the road to pulling the plug on the
Right.
nukes.
Instead of saying this is the final day, you sign it with two world leaders, sign it after doing years of negotiation. He said this is going to be a get to know you, and then we're going to get out the details. So we're going to be hearing about this story maybe for a year or two as they get closer and closer to getting rid of their nukes. I love that John Bolton was there. He's the ultimate hardliner. He'd be sitting on this couch telling us what to look out for. Instead, he's in that room. I think it works out good for the country.
All right. Let's hand it over to Jillian, who has some more headlines for us. Good morning, Jillian.
That's right. Good morning to you. And let's get to a Fox News alert now. President Trump's chief economic advisor is recovering from a mild heart attack. Larry Kudlow is in good condition at Walter Reed Medical Center. He is expected to make a full recovery. Also breaking right now, 4 young children are dead after a day-long standoff with a gunman who shot a cop. Orlando police say Gary Wayne Lindsay also shot and killed himself. He's believed to be the father of 2 of the children. A police officer who was shot responding to the initial call is recovering. It's deadline day for the Justice Department. The House Intelligence Committee demanding they hand over documents related to the Russia probe. It concerns an alleged FBI informant who collected information on the Trump campaign. Committee Chair Devin Nunes says refusing to allow members of Congress to review the documents is obstruction of a lawful investigation. So look at your headlines. Send it back to you.
The Department of Justice will talk about the documents, but they won't necessarily show them. And Congress, wants to see them. All right. 7-Eleven now here in New York City. President Trump hailing his agreement with Kim Jong-un, but Dr. Sebastian Gorka says he won't get any credit from Democrats. Sebastian joins us next.
Plus, Anthony Scaramucci says the president is mirroring what Ronald Reagan did 31 years ago today. He joins us live, coming up.
Today, we had a historic meeting and decided to leave the past behind, and we are about to sign a historic document. The world will see a major change. I would like to express my gratitude to President Trump to make this meeting happen.
Fox News national security strategist and former deputy assistant to President Trump is Dr. Sebastian Gorka. He is live actually there in Singapore, and he joins us now for more. What is your reaction to what has happened in the last 24 hours, Dr. Gorka?
Stunning, absolutely stunning. This is a dictatorship. You always have to be very cautious. But the fact that within one day, less than a day, the heads of state have not only met, but have actually signed a joint statement on the full denuclearization of North Korea to include other issues such as the MIAs from the Korean War. It's beyond all expectations, and it really is history in the making. We have to remember the Korean War never ended. It was a ceasefire, and now we have a chance to put that conflict to bed after 68 years.
Right, exactly. Sebastian, while you call it stunning, I'm examining the online world, and a lot of people say, it's no big deal. We can't verify that anything's really going to happen. Don't quite get the hullabaloo.
Yeah, as opposed to the last 25 years from Bill Clinton onwards, where we threw cash at this regime, where we didn't ratchet up the sanctions like we've done in the last 500 days. And what happened? They went from not having nuclear weapons to having nuclear weapons, to detonating their warheads in test detonations, to not having ballistic missiles, to actually launching them over our ally, Japan. You couldn't have a starker difference between the last 25 years of handling this problem and the last 500 days.
The whole way it started with the president arriving second, Kim Jong-un arriving first, them shaking hands and walking through. We understand it was a 41-minute one-on-one. Then they went to a 4x4 session, and they came out with this agreement. So, Dr. Gorka, the way I understand it is, look at this as the starting point. Whatever's there is there, but it's just going to grow in intensity in terms of what the inspections are going to look like, in terms of what the verifications is going to look like, in terms of what an overall treaty My understanding is the president wants to submit this as a treaty to be verified. Is that your understanding?
I think, and I spoke to the president, but we didn't discuss that. I think that's a good option. I think it's a nuclear weapons agreement. It has to do with nuclear weapons. So that should raise to the level of treaty. And it puts the senators on the spot. What is your attitude to the denuclearization of North Korea and the results that Mike Pompeo and the president have put on the table in just the last few hours? So yeah, I think that's the way to go. And it is such a good turn of fate that we have the former director of the CIA in the front seat at the State Department to make sure that this isn't just a piece of paper, this isn't just pablum, but that we have the most rigid inspection regime the West has ever seen when it comes to WMDs.
Yeah, Dr. Gorka, Mike Pompeo has only been in that office as Secretary of State for 6 weeks. Got a lot done in that short period of time.
Yes.
If Rex Tillerson were still at the State Department, would all of this have still happened?
Having seen Rex operate up close in the Oval Office, and now that he's left his position, I am comfortable in saying, no, Ainsley, absolutely not. Look, there is something I call the speed of Trump, like the speed of light. Mike Pompeo moves almost as fast as the speed of Trump. Look at what happened just 6 weeks ago. I was filling in for a radio host on a big national radio show, and I'd just been handed the update. Secretary Pompeo has been confirmed by the Senate. The next break, I had to update it with, oh, by the way, he's already been sworn in by Justice Alito. And as soon as I'd given my listeners the update, what did I have to read into it? I had to say, oh, and he's already on his way to Andrews Air Force Base to fly to the Middle East and to Belgium. That's a different way of doing business.
Dr. Gorka, we're going to watch you tonight with Sean Hannity. Great job in Singapore. Thank you. Meanwhile, coming up straight ahead, more on this story. North Korea promises complete denuclearization or working towards it. The president says it's just the beginning. Can he make it happen? We'll discuss it.
Good morning to you and welcome back. We will have the latest on the Singapore summit in just a few moments. But first, taking a look at some other stories making headlines at this hour. Russia is vowing to strike back following fresh U.S. sanctions. The Trump administration slapping penalties on several Russian companies and individuals in response to cyber attacks against the U.S. and its allies. It's unclear exactly how Russia will retaliate. And Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen is the first cabinet member to hold a meeting at the new American embassy in Jerusalem. She met with her Israeli counterpart, calling the opportunity a distinct honor. Brian?
All right, thank you a lot, Jillian. From fire and fury to this historic summit, President Trump weighing in on that tough rhetoric that finally brought Kim Jong-un, he believes, to the table.
Other administrations, I don't want to get specific on that, but they had a policy of silence. If they said something very bad, very threatening and horrible, just don't answer. So I think the rhetoric, I hated to do it. Sometimes I felt foolish doing it, but we had no choice.
All right, so what happens next? We are back with our esteemed panel. Hagar Chemali is a former spokesperson for the U.S. mission to the UN. Morgan Ortagus is here, former State Department press officer with locations in D.C. and New York. We'll talk about that later. And David Tafuri worked in the State Department under President Obama. David, for you, there's 4 principles that they have agreed on working towards denuclearization. This is just a starting point, but you are skeptical still. In what respect?
Well, I'm not skeptical in the sense of what happened today. What happened today was historic. But we still don't know if actually Kim Jong-un is going to change. And just like his father, who did a nuclear agreement with President Clinton in 1994, that broke down over the details, in part because North Korea didn't follow the denuclearization plan. So we have just the first step in a very long process. Now, President Trump candidly acknowledged that to actually denuclearize, it's going to take many years. That's because North Korea has nuclear sites all over the country, and we have to send in inspectors, and we have to help them denuclearize. Meanwhile, Kim Jong-un wants sanctions relief right away, so he's not going to be that patient.
But you know he's not going to get it, because that was clear. The sanctions stay in place right now. So more Morgan, if we start seeing satellite images of them moving different plants, we're able to see pretty clear that something goes on. We don't know exactly. Then there'll be a problem. Things get derailed again.
I think the president was exactly right that the reason that this summit happened today and the reason why North Korea came to the table is because a combination of tough rhetoric where he made it clear that that there would be a military option combined with the economic sanctions. What will be really important on the economic sanctions front, and Hagar can speak to this having been at the UN, is that we need the Chinese and the South Koreans to keep those in place, the Russians as well. So that will be a very challenging effort. But the president is going to have to continue to hold his feet to the fire. I think this was a historic day, but the only way that they stay to the table is that when they know that the president's not going to get distracted by something else, as past administrations have done, but instead that the president is going to hone on this, he's going to keep their feet to the fire, and he's not going to allow what's happened in the past. And he has someone very clear-eyed in John Bolton and Mike Pompeo.
Right. John Bolton is going to really press because he needs a lot of convincing to even get to this point. He also indicated that it's all going to hinge on the one-on-one meeting, which was 41 minutes, as opposed to the 4x4, which lasted another 4 hours. Hagar, first off, when you look at where we're at right now, the leader, Kim Jong-un, said, "We've agreed not to talk about the past. Let's start anew today." Does that mean anything?
Of course, I don't think it's surprising when you have two former adversaries, or still current adversaries, I guess, meeting to say something like that, right? To start a new page, to start afresh. Now, listen, while I do think it's important, at the end of the day, as David mentioned, as Morgan had mentioned, you really, verification, follow through, enforcement this is what this is all about, right? And the past negotiations that have taken place, a lot of the reason why they broke down was because of lack of follow through or lack of enforcement. North Korea is going to try to be deceptive. They're going to try to have their cake and eat it too. And that's not surprising, but I believe that President Trump also knows that. I think he's aware of that, which is why the sanctions are so important.
Right. And real quick, guys, lightning round. David, in particular, the president was able, through Nikki Haley, to get 4 UN resolutions passed, 3 of which were unprecedented in the strength of the sanctions because of the blast that happened during the Obama administration in 2016. It got everybody's attention. So that bad thing might have launched a good thing.
That's correct. And also, another bad thing that might have launched a good thing is what happened to Otto Warmbier, which was very tragic and very tragic for his parents. But as the president mentioned, that might have also helped because North Korea got so much criticism over that.
The multi-stage rocket boomeranged. It was supposed to intimidate us. Instead, it convinced the world that we had a legitimate threat and our military option might be our only option. Am I right, Morgan?
We've been kicking the can down the road for decades on this, waiting for them to have the capabilities. The chickens have come home to roost. The capability is there, and that's why there's the urgency. People have been asking me, why now? Why do we have to deal with North Korea now? Because now there is a direct threat to the homeland, and there's no more waiting, right? We have to pivot and deal with this issue.
No one says this is done like the Iranian deal. They said this is just the beginning, Hagar. So even critics have to say, you just judge this incident. Don't act like this deal is done.
Right. No, the deal is not done. And in fact, frankly, they've gone farther than we expected today. But certainly it has laid the framework for months, for a long time of negotiations. So we can't jump and say that it's a victory just yet. But it is absolutely historic. It's an absolute positive step.
7 months without a rocket. So every week that goes by without a rocket going over Japan or near Guam is a plus. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
All right, coming up straight ahead, what impact could the President's Summit have on the midterm elections? Dr. Larry Sabato is peering into his crystal ball. There he is. Plus, Anthony Scaramucci says President Trump is mirroring what Ronald Reagan did 31 years ago. We're going to ask him to expand on that because he told us to write that in the tease.
In the room alone, and then the subsequent talks with your team and their team. How honest? How brutal? What was said? Try and bring people into the room.
So we got along very well. We got along from the beginning. We started off, he and myself and 2 interpreters, and from the beginning we got along. I made the statement, and I've said it before. I've said it about a lot of different kinds of relationships. You can almost tell right at the beginning.
Right at the beginning. And famously, he said this past week, he will know within the first 1 minute if things were going to go well. And they did. Anthony Scaramucci knows that perspective. He's former White House communications director. He was there for 11 days, 11 long days.
Yeah, well, thank you for getting it right.
Right.
some of the fake news media says 10 hurts my feelings.
Exactly.
So thank you for getting it right.
Right. Speaking of the fake news, before you came over, you were watching some of the other channels.
Well, I have to admit, I was watching some of the other channels, a little bit of hate watching, because I just think it's so dishonest the way they're portraying it. I mean, at the end of the day, the president is breaking new ground, breaking history. He will denuclearize the peninsula and then likely even go on to tackle Iran. And so I just find it fascinating that people can't actually give him the credit that he's due as a result of his negotiating tactic and style. And so, and he admitted to Sean Hannity last night that the bellicosity of the rhetoric actually helped force the situation into where it is. And that's been true to his 40-year negotiating style. So
well, how can they say that nothing good came out of this? Everything good. We didn't have to give any bribes. There was no money exchanged. Everything that happened, even if they hadn't had that meeting last night and hadn't signed the documents, 3 American hostages still came home. There was the conversation. We saw the president of North Korea go to the DMZ line. So much has happened as a result. So much good has happened.
Well, that's why the pendulum, Ainsley, has swung so far now where the American people are like, going a little tone deaf as a result of that kind of nonstop rhetoric. So, no, but they're saying that this was a big publicity and propaganda stunt for the North Korean dictator, and nothing's going to come of it. But I really do not believe that, just given what I know about President Trump and Secretary Pompeo.
You know, the whole thing, it reminds me a little of sports. It's like, I don't like their training camp, I don't like their methods, but if they go out and keep winning, after a while they'll say where this is going. So this is just the beginning of the negotiation, and in the end, if it keeps going forward and verification goes there and the nukes start giving up and tractors start pulling out, that'll be the answer. But if you ask Kim Jong-un what he thought through a translator, I thought this was interesting when asked, they all made statements about this moment before they signed the document. Here's what Kim Jong-un said about the president.
Today, we had a historic meeting and decided to leave the past behind, and we are about to sign a historic document. The world will see a major change. I would like to express my gratitude to President Trump to make this meeting happen.
And they acknowledged, the president said he acknowledged in the meeting that they didn't get off to a good start with Clinton, what went wrong with his dad, and how this might be different.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm going to throw Dennis Rodman in here for a second because he was trying to throw an olive branch 3 or 4 years ago, seeing if he could, or 6 years ago, to see if he could reset the table there as well.
And President Obama wouldn't give him the time of day. That was his quote last night.
Give him the time of day. So you have to just think about how disruptive and how adaptive President Trump is as a leader and as an international statesman. One thing being left out of the conversation today that I want to bring up is the trade deal with South Korea. You will see that they've done a magnificent job on behalf of the United States, our companies, and American workers in reframing the trade deal with South Korea. And that will be a template for future deals around the world.
The first one that was redone, wasn't it?
That's correct. And so the point being is that you can tie all of this together. The president is sitting there speaking about fairness, trade parity, community of nations, global peace, and global prosperity. Right. I know that may be a little tough to take for some of his opponents, but that's his game plan, and he's executing it brilliantly.
Let's see if Canada's watching. All right, and there's the famous handshake. They've got the signed document under his arm. You know what, Anthony? It was 31 years ago today that President Reagan told Mikhail Gorbachev, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And now, fast forward today, and essentially President Trump is picking up Reagan's mantle in doing things a little differently.
There's no question about that. I actually tweeted that out last night about 1 o'clock before I went to bed, because I was looking at the historical stuff from last night. And this is another thing to point out against State Department protocol. The ambassador didn't want him to say that. There were so many people in the community that did not want, they wanted him to stick with the standard establishment rhetoric and protocol. And the president rejected all of that.
He's an ad-libber.
And he sent a gigantic message. He was writing in the limousine those lines back into his speech on the way over to the Brandenburg Gate. Right. So you just have to think about the symbolism in that. You have to also recognize how powerful the country is. 17, 18 months into the job, the President of the United States recognizes the leadership capability and the skill set that we have inside the United States to help force the world towards greater communities. So you got to give the president credit for that, same as Reagan.
Is that why the president chose this date to do it? I guess it was just a coincidence, though, because
I
he
don't
never
know.
mentioned it.
I think it may be a coincidence, but I also wish him a early happy birthday. He's going to be 72 years old.
On Thursday.
It's a lesson for young people. Don't drink, don't smoke. You can travel around the world and not sleep when you're 72 years old.
26 hours straight. He's
no problem. He's the Energizer Bunny at 72. There's a big lesson there. Don't drink, don't smoke.
And ultimately, the lesson of what we have just seen in the last 24
I just
hours.
sounded like a Mormon evangelical there, like I'm a Mormon missionary, but I'm just telling you, it works.
Well, it's all a good start. What
Right.
has happened over in Singapore?
No question about it.
All right.
Very,
Anthony?
very
Thanks,
exciting.
Anthony.
Great to be here, guys.
Thank you very much.
Great to have you here.
Great to share it with you.
All right. It is 20 minutes before the top of the hour, and Jillian, you've got some news.
That's right. Good morning to you. Fear is growing as the violent gang MS-13 infiltrates a middle school. Teachers and parents in Maryland calling the situation a ticking time bomb. The Washington Post reports William Wirt Middle School in Riverdale has become a battlefield where fighting, drug dealing, and attempting to recruit young immigrant children is an everyday occurrence. School officials are denying any problems with gang activity. In just a few hours, accused leaker James Wolfe will appear in federal court. The former Senate intelligence staffer will be charged with lying to investigators about his contacts with reporters. Wolfe turned himself into the FBI as part of an ongoing investigation into government leaks. The city of Seattle voting today to repeal the controversial head tax less than a month after passing it. It requires large companies to contribute $275 per employee every year to raise money for housing and homeless services. Companies like Amazon and Starbucks oppose the tax. Let's look at your headlines. I'll send it back to you.
And it sounds like now it may actually fail, that particular head tax. All right. Thank you very much, Jillian.
Thank you, Jillian. All right, President Trump says North Korea can leave the past behind to create peace.
As history has proven over and over again, adversaries can indeed become friends.
Can the country learn from this and finally unite?
Plus, what impact could the President's Summit have on the midterm elections come November? Larry Sabato peering into his crystal ball. You'll see him next.
Good morning and welcome back. Kid Rock campaigning for a Republican congressional candidate in Michigan tonight. The rocker joining Senate hopeful John James at an event in his home state. James is seeking the Republican nomination to challenge Democrat Debbie Stabenow. And President Trump is taking his message to the Midwest when he holds a rally in Duluth, Minnesota next Wednesday. It will be the president's first trip to Minnesota since taking office. Steve?
Thank you very much, Jillian. President Trump wrapping up his historic summit with North Korea overnight. Back here at home, the markets are responding to his accomplishments. Americans showing their optimism in President Trump, with 52% saying they approve of the way the president is handling the economy. So will these major accomplishments, the historic summit and the booming economy, could they possibly impact the midterm elections? That guy right there, Larry Sabato, director of University of Virginia's Center for Politics, probably has a thing or two to say about that, and he joins us right now from Virginia. Larry, good morning to you.
Good morning, Steve.
First of all, let's just start your general observation about how the president has conducted himself in Singapore.
This was a transformational moment for Donald Trump. I don't know what the facts are of the communique and what's going to happen in the future and what North Korea will do. But I'll tell you what will have a political impact is Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un crossing that stage in front of all those flags. And the reason it was transformative is if you go back to the campaign and the first year plus of the Trump administration, what was the complaint you heard frequently from Trump critics? He was bellicose. He would get us into a war. We were going to be fighting North Korea. Guess what? That's over. Whatever happens in the future, I don't think it will be as bellicose. So he's changed his image in a way that sticks in the average person's mind. They're not going to listen to all this analysis of, every word in the communique. That's not what busy people do, who live normal lives, unlike you and me. They're going to focus on that image.
Sure. Although it is interesting, he did tell Sean Hannity in an interview that's going to be on tonight on Hannity that he felt that the rough rhetoric, calling him Little Rocket Man, actually got him to the table, which is interesting. Our big question, though, is how does this impact the November elections? Does it help congressional Republicans who are running for re-election?
Well, I think this plus the economy does. You've got one thing that Republicans can talk about in foreign policy. We have many things, but this in particular, people will connect with. And then the economy is golden. And what is very useful to Republicans is first that they pass the tax cut bill. Right. They can link what's happening now to that. And second, the economic data can be localized. You can give specific data about employment and about wage growth in almost any state. And so when the president goes to hold a rally, that's what leads the ticket. Can I just add one personal word? You mentioned one factor in getting the Korean summit underway. I was really pleased to see the president give credit to our late University of Virginia student, Otto Warmbier. You may recall that he was tortured to death by the North Koreans, effectively. He got a week with his family here, but he was already essentially dead when they sent him back. It's a reminder of how brutal this dictatorship is. But the president was good enough to give to Otto's legacy some credit for what happened, and that's much appreciated around here.
And in fact, the president was talking about how the Warmbier case actually focused eyes on Kim Jong-un, and the rhetoric started, and fast forward to today, and here we are. Larry, real quickly, you were talking about how the economy is golden and how this is good for President Trump as well. So a lot of people are looking in, wondering how this all translates into the mainstream media. For the most part, they like to use him as a piñata. Is this going to be a turning point, or will they at least give him one day of good press?
Well, my instincts say no, based on everything I've seen. But I think, again, the image overrides the words. At a certain point, the torrent of words, except, of course, from you, can go in one ear and out the other. But you remember those pictures. That's what people are going to be talking about today, because it was an incredible sight. Steve, is there one person in the country who actually thought the day Trump was inaugurated that he would be meeting with Kim Jong-un? I mean, seriously, if there's somebody out there, let me know, because I want to recruit him for the crystal ball team.
No kidding.
So, when something shocking happens, it sticks.
And we saw quite an image in that picture right there. Larry, thank you very much for joining us today from the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Thank you, Steve.
All right. Meanwhile, straight ahead, President Trump says North Korea can leave the past behind to create peace.
As history has proven over and over again, adversaries can indeed become friends.
Can the country learn from this and finally unite? We're going to talk to that. Plus, former deputy campaign manager David Bossie is going to join us. Got a busy hour. Starts shortly right here on Fox News Channel.
Yesterday's conflict does not have to be tomorrow's war. And as history has proven over and over again, adversaries can indeed become friends.
President Trump and Kim Jong-un coming together, committing to lasting peace as they sign their names on that historic document. The civility, a shining example to a divided America. So what can the country learn from this to finally unite? Here to weigh in on this is Executive Director for Unhyphenated America, Mr. Christopher Harris. Christopher, great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, good morning, Ainsley.
What can we take away from this? I mean, if you can have the President of the United States of America meeting and saying we could become friends with the leader of North Korea, even though we know what he's capable of, what can we as a country learn from that to unite?
Well, we're talking about the past, and I'm old enough to remember the Cold War. I actually grew up overseas in Germany during the Cold War. I looked across the wall, the Berlin Wall, into East Germany, and those were our hated enemies. We knew they were wanting to destroy us, but then you fast forward, and here we now have a unified Germany. And of course, Germany was our enemy back during World War II. And then you have Japan. We used to be our enemy, but now some of our greatest friends. And so Germany and Japan are the number 3 and number 4 largest economies in the world right now. And, the same thing can happen with North Korea. North Korea and South Korea, I think South Korea is the 11th or 12th largest economy. They can become unified and they'll have more peace there. And here's the thing. You have a very ugly past that you can get over. Right? And the same thing can happen here in the United States of America. That's what we believe in with Unhyphenated America, is that we don't believe that you should be held back by your past. You recognize the past. I mean, and even like President Reagan said, you trust but verify. We understand the past of North Korea. So we're going to go forward with a little bit of trust, but we're going to verify everything that they say before this friendship can really blossom.
I definitely agree with that. What grade would you give him? You have a lot of the naysayers and a lot of his critics saying that he's not very presidential. And if you read some of his tweets, you'll hear negative comments about that. But what he did over the last 24 hours, he was very serious. Yeah. What grade do you give him? Do you think he looked presidential?
Absolutely. And I'm on record as having not been someone who was a Trump supporter. But here's the thing. I did say that when he was elected, I said there's a couple things that I hope he will do. One of them, of course, being to work to increase national security. Okay. I mean, essentially that. And that's what he's done. I mean, everybody talked about, oh, he's so bellicose, he's this, he's that, he's going to get us into a war. They said the same thing about Ronald Reagan, and he became one of the greatest. And you know what? President Trump is he's on track to become one of the greatest ever. And so I give him a solid A+.
All right. Thank you so much, Christopher, for joining us. Have a good one.
Thank you.
You're welcome. President Trump sitting down with our own Sean Hannity for his first interview since the summit. We've got a preview coming up next, plus David Bossie and Ben Shapiro live.